I'm Tom Payton, Director and Publisher at Trinity University Press. Thanks for joining us for Maverick Book Club. As a nonprofit cultural and educational publisher, we are committed to an evolving agenda of work that engages, questions, and brings us together as community in increasingly productive ways. Welcome to the world of Marfa Garden, the wonders of dry desert plants. It is a full-color celebration of the flowering plants of the Chihuahuan Desert and neighboring regions. Marfa, the internationally acclaimed arts and cultural mecca in far west Texas, sits squarely in the Chihuahuan Desert, North America's second largest desert at 140,000 square miles, spanning northern Mexico, West Texas, into New Mexico and Arizona. The vast desert is a surprising showcase for colorful plant diversity with garden lessons for us that reach far beyond its boundaries. Please join me in welcoming authors Jim Fissel, Martha Hughes, Jim Martinez, and Lou Saxon, as well as our moderator, Rainer Judd. She is president of the Judd Foundation and the daughter of the acclaimed artist, Donald Judd. She's a filmmaker and lifelong environmentalist. So enjoy yourself. And at the end, don't forget to check out the book we'll all be reading and talking about next month, Fault Lines, Portraits of East Austin by John Langmore in conversation with Michael King. All books are available to you at a special discount using the link and promo code shown in the discussion, or visit us online at tupress.org to discover other books and events. Thanks again for joining us, and welcome to Rainer, who will introduce the authors.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to everybody at Trinity University Press. Thank you all for coming to join us in, I would say, somewhat of a celebration of this beautiful book in discussion with 4 authors. We could check with the authors to see, I think Tom did a pretty great explanation of where Marfa is situated in the Chihuahuan Desert. Does anybody have anything to add to explain to our visitors or viewers who haven't been out here what the Chihuahuan Desert is?
If you look at the map, Marfa is right in the square center of the Chihuahuan Desert. And Marfa sits in a particular ecology that's an upland grassland. So it sits kind of high in elevation. And so the majority of plants right immediately around Marfa is grass. There are probably 65 plus varieties of grasses that grow out here. And as well as a lot of other plants that are in the book that grow along with these grasslands. So, and it's surrounded by mountains, and it goes down to the Rio Grande River. There's escarpments, quite beautiful.
So this was Jim Martinez, who I just realized I forgot to introduce all of you. Jim Martinez is a landscape designer specializing in native and xeric plants of Texas and the Southwest, and the principal of Jim Martinez and Associates. Lou Saxon is a freelance product photographer who was drawn to Marfa by the beauty and serenity of the desert. Jim Fissel has designed user interfaces for more than 30 years as principal design consultant and owner of Fissel Associates. Martha Hughes is a writer and professional artist who works in paint, photography, and computer-based media. And I think the story of how the 4 of you came together to make this book is really beautiful, as well as the process and the time you took and what you invented. So let's start with any thoughts about what the goals were when you came to realize you wanted to make a book. Did you have a discussion about what the goals of making this book would be?
We actually had kind of several goals. I mean, this all started when we all hiked together, and we've been doing it for many years. And a lot of what we would see on the hikes, all 4 of us had different perspectives while we were hiking. And hiking with Jim Martinez, he kind of slows you down a little bit when you hike to actually stop and see the plants and get a better understanding of the environmental aspects of where you're at. So I think it really started as a fun collaboration between all of us. Martha had worked on other books related to gardens. She's a great artist and has done some incredible landscape paintings, as well as a lot of different styles. Mary Lou has a great perspective with her photography. And with Jim's experience, we just all had four unique perspectives when we would go hiking together. And I think we all realized that we could have fun putting something together. And we kind of, one of the goals initially was we had decided to work on a book. We said that we would continue working on it as long as we were having fun doing it. And we certainly had a great time over many years working on the book. But one of the main goals of the book was, I mean, we're very fortunate to live in a very beautiful area in the country. And I think we wanted to make sure we could share kind of the beauty that we had around us with other people. And we're trying to figure out a way to do that. I think one of the first statements we always said is we wanted this to be a celebration of the plants of the Chihuahuan Desert. So we wanted to find a way to make them more visible and available for people to see. A lot of people that come to Marfa they see these big landscapes. There's great views, but they also have preconceived notions of what a desert is. And they think it's a more barren place, very dry place. But they don't realize the amount of diversity in a desert. So, I mean, we learned that through hiking with Jim Martinez at various places throughout the Chihuahuan Desert. So it was really our goal to kind of share what we were seeing on our hikes with other people and get people interested in kind of slowing down on your hike, taking more interest in the plants of the area.
So Jim, you've known Jim for a longer time, perhaps, than Mary Lou and Martha?
Yeah, Jim and I known each other getting close to 40 years. And
I wanted to ask, I guess it's for either Mary Lou or Martha, but do you remember, was there a specific moment when you became aware that you were learning something on these hikes, that you were having a shift or opening up to an awareness of the land that you hadn't been before?
I could make a little comment there, and that is that because we live in a desert, the times when there are flowers is very special. There are times when we've had some rain and the flowers come rather quickly and we all get real excited. So we basically would torture Jim Martinez to tell us every single flower and what it was. So the fascination was constant. Our hikes were super enjoyable, and I think it probably took us a year or so of hiking together to start talking about a book, but the information was flowing and the ideas were flowing.
And for me, we'd be walking along, hiking along, and I'd be thinking my thoughts and looking at the view and everything, that Jim would stop and point out some detail of like a bush that we were about to pass, and start talking about the delicate little flowers and things that I would have just totally walked right by if he hadn't pointed it out. And I think that's what we ended up trying to do in the book, is bring that kind of discovery to the reader.
That's really beautiful, both of you. And then I was aware when I was thinking about this talk that I'd like to ask Jim Martinez, what do you think it is in your background and your heritage and your awareness and your nature that has brought you to this focus? And we won't grill you about why you're such a great teacher, but really, your passion obviously is contagious, because now there's a book. And many people in Marfa specifically are very inspired by the work you're doing with landscape work. But can you say anything about your background beyond the bio that I read?
Yeah, the interest in plants started really early. When I was, I don't know, 8 or 9, 10, 12 years old, I would go stay with my grandmother during the summer for 2 to 3 weeks. And then she would wait for me to go collecting herbs because she was kind of an herbalist. And she sort of taught me what all the plants were, what were good plants and not good plants, how to collect without, putting an overburden on the plants themselves. So it started really early. And then, I was the gardener in my family. So that was my responsibility. And then it continued in school. Botany was one of my favorite classes. And then becoming a soil scientist was sort of just adding the icing to the cake, simply because when I was doing soil resource inventory, which is an intense type of survey, you have to know all the plants that belong to every soil type. So my bosses at the time, supervisors, were really, really great plant people. So they were the ones that were teaching me and quizzing me and making me learn all this material. But the other thing that they taught me was how to look at an environment, understand what's been going on or what it should be producing and why it's not producing. So they gave me a great perspective as to how to read the landscape. And it has never stopped from that point. So the interest.
That's great, thank you. And before we talk a little bit about the, I think, really wonderful process of the making of the book, I just wanted to clarify for maybe somebody has just joined who grew up in a, I don't know, kind of a 1950s inspired suburban environment in America. We all know that that was really promoted a lot for quite a few decades and still has strongholds. And there might not be an awareness with everybody about why wildlife needs native plants. Would any of you want to speak to that? Because this book is entirely native plants to the region, is it not?
It is. It is to the region, and there's 3 or 4 plants that are from adjacent regions. I think what, from my perspective for the book, was to get people to understand that this is an evolution of an ecosystem, and it involves everyone: birds, insects, reptiles, mammals, you name it. So it's not just a world of plants. It's a world of plants that are part of a larger system. So, and you have to look at it that way, that the diversity of them, a lot of things that happened with like when I was developing gardens, I like the diversity simply because it replicates what is in nature. And that's what I try to do with my gardens. So that's important, just to make sure that you understand that everyone is involved in the ecosystems.
Great, thank you so much. So hearing from Mary Lou or Martha or Jim Fissel, do you remember the first moment when you realized you were making a book? Or did it creep up on you and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, we're making a book? I mean, was there a meeting? Was there Prosecco involved? What happened? How did it, was there a moment, or was it gradual and hard to pinpoint?
Well, I had gotten this thing from Amazon called the microfleur press, and it was, you could make pressed flowers in your microwave oven in 7 seconds. And I was just fooling around with that just for fun. And I made some, and then I scanned them and printed them. And Jim Fissel saw them, and he had been thinking about books of botanical illustrations. They reminded him of that, and it kind of grew from there. Jim Fissel can expand on that a bit.
I'm sorry, I just saw that chat comment about the Prosecco. So, and yet,
Oh, yeah, I think they want to know the confirmation whether or not Prosecco was involved.
yes, definitely. Prosecco has been involved in almost all of our get-togethers. Not while we're hiking, but when we get together in Marfa. And that's part of having fun with this whole process. Yeah, with Martha kind of inspired me when she was doing these pressed plants, and then she had a high resolution scanner, and this was probably, Martha, maybe 6 or 7 years ago,
Mhm.
or longer.
Yeah.
And we have a collection of botanicals, and I just love how you get into the detail of a plant in the botanicals and all the stages of a plant's life, including details of the flowers, the seeds, the leaves, the structure of the plant. And what Martha was doing was kind of opening up the ideas of, is there a way that we can do that through scanners or photography? And that's when we started talking with Mary Lou about doing photography of various plants, because the scanning was actually working and getting very high resolution images, but there were a lot of shadows and a lot of other details that were kind of complicating the images. And then Mary Lou was able to figure out a way to do incredible photography without the shadows and just isolating the plants, so that we could get individual shots that showed the various stages of the plants. So we started putting together some ideas of layouts of an actual book at that point.
Yeah, the photography is absolutely exquisite, and as is the content. And I think that as is my nature, and perhaps was not on the agenda, I wanted to ask you, on what shoulders do you stand? Maybe Mary Lou could speak to, I know there was a photographer that came up in our conversations who was an inspiration.
Jim Fissel, will you remind me of the book that we looked at?
It was the book called Flowers by Irving Penn.
So Jim Fissel and I were flipping through that book, and Irving Penn, had treated the flowers in a very professional way. They looked like they had been shot in a photography studio. And so I think that rang a little bell. And then with further testing, I mean, we tested this for years, I'd say, until we came upon something that we all liked. And then, and so that ended up being close-ups. And I was really glad that everyone embraced the idea of close-ups, because it was fun. So.
And beautiful.
Well, thank you very much. So the images could be surprising, because a lot of desert plants are kind of small. It's an adaptation to the desert, is to have small leaves and small petals, and by blowing them up, you see some incredible things. So it was very fun. And yeah. I'd like to say, as far as it being a book, I'm not sure I was ever sure that we would really get the whole thing completed. But when we met with Trinity Press and they showed some interest, that gave us, another boost to really get it done. And so they were really good to us.
Yeah, I wonder if the beauty and the power and the close-up photography comes from the relationship the Texans have to highways and how fast they drive everywhere. And so we're all familiar with certain plants at high speed. And then we're on the nature trail, and then we're dealing with ourselves, because all of a sudden we have some quiet and we're dealing with ourselves. But it is rare to have somebody in your company who slows you down to talk about the plants. And then it's even more rare for people such as yourselves to actually go through while drinking Prosecco, the energy and dedication of photographing them. There was a nice description that Jim Fissel that you gave about the daily process. Do you remember?
Yeah, when we actually figured out that how to do the photography, we kind of started in the winter and actually took almost a full year where I would go out every day basically into the garden and check the status of plants, and I would take clippings or cuttings of plants to Mary Lou, maybe 3 or 4 times a week for probably for about 6 months out of the year. It was pretty regular every week, but it was over a year process. And so I would take about 5 or 6 clippings of different plants every morning over to Mary Lou, leave them at her studio, and then she would spend the afternoon or the day photographing the plants. And then at the end of the day, I would go over and pick up a thumb drive and would have a lot of fun practically every evening seeing these incredible photographs that she had been taking. So we were creating a big database of all of these photos. I think we counted at the end of the year, Mary Lou had done almost or maybe over 2,000 photos.
Wow.
And the
Yes,
book,
total.
yeah, and I think the book has about 400 of those photos. So we had a great selection to choose from. But that whole year was a fun process because it was exciting to see what I could find in the garden that would be appropriate to photograph. I had a tendency to overwhelm Mary Lou with the number of plants I would bring her, and I would also bring a lot of dormant plants or seed heads or plants that look dead. But it was important in terms of the structure of the plants to show the sequence in a lot of these plant life cycles. So we had a huge collection of photography to work from.
So
And
could you stop and explain the garden that you're pulling from, for which maybe this project, I'm not sure if the project would have flowed in the same way if you hadn't spent the time to make your Marfa Garden. And I'm not sure that viewers know that if they haven't seen the book yet, they might not, I think it's explained in the book, but they might not know that there is an actual garden that has been lovingly created and not entirely created from nothing. There were pre-existing plants, but could you give us a little sense of the time frame for the beautiful garden that you all have and how it came into play with the book?
Jim Martinez?
Well, when we bought the property and then which was about 21 years ago, and there was a series of trees, but the property was pretty much native grass. And we started the process of designing a house, and I tend to do the gardens many times before the house even gets established. And so I'd already had an idea that I wanted to establish this desert garden so people could see that there are other plants besides cacti and grassland, just grasses in this grassland. So the plants were slowly planted over this sort of 20-year period. And, a lot of them are very, very hardy because I would only come out here maybe every 6 weeks to water some of them if I would water them. But I didn't really have a water source for about 5 years. So they just survived on their own. And I was trying to determine whether they were going to be cold hardy for this area. So I was just planting all these things that I knew were native that I could buy at a nursery. And then it sort of evolved from that.
I do want to talk about the books that are the shoulders that this book stands on. And I also want to speak to Martha about capturing information from Jim, which I thought was a very interesting story. But would any of you specifically like to, maybe not all of you read some of the, I guess, kind of handbooks or really great books that we have in the region that some of us refer to or use, that you may have been aware you weren't going to make that book again, but you probably checked in with those regional books for what's been described. Does anybody want to talk about some of those authors and books?
Jim Martinez would be the guy for that question.
But you know, the books that you're talking about, we use them all the time, and we used them all the time when we were doing our hikes, just as reference materials. And I have a big collection of books of all sorts, either just garden books or more technical books. But when you're doing a field guide, it's a very small book, so it's really hard to get a lot of detail there. I mean, they try as much as they can, and we weren't trying to produce that. We wanted people to really see these plants in a particular way, mostly their beauty, because some of these are fairly small and maybe they're a little prickly in that, but we wanted people to just use it as a field guide if you want to carry it out to the field with you, but to just look at these plants in a different way. And I wanted to make sure that, or I guess we wanted to make sure that the plants, the individual plants, you can identify them scientifically by just the photographs. I mean, they're so specific for those particular plants. So.
Yeah, my experience with the book was that it was some of the most, it was the most glamorous setting I had ever seen the plants in, and that they were elevated by the photography in a way that I hadn't seen in the guidebooks. So it was the photography alone that communicated to me that how much you love these plants. You meaning authors, but
yeah, we really wanted the plants to be the focus of the book, and there's a lot of really great garden books out there. They had just shown the Bold Dry Garden, and there are a lot of, well, they're really beautiful books that show the plants in garden settings as well, but we felt that sometimes it's hard to isolate the plants from everything around them in a garden. So we wanted to take a little different perspective and just isolate the plants. That's why we got rid of all the backgrounds, shadows, everything, and just allowed the person to see just the individual plants. We did have a lot of discussions about including in the book, showing the plants in garden settings or in wild settings to give a person more of a context of the book or of the plant. So that's why we included the appendix at the back of the book to try to give a little bit more or give more information about the plants, or give people ways to access more online information about a plant and see it in garden settings.
yeah,
Jim Fissel created these graphics that really take a lot of the information that you find in reference books, but it's kind of color coded, and it's very a nice way to do it. And I feel that we kept the text, we kind of tried to keep it simple and not off-putting. And Martha Hughes finessed the language so that it was easier to read than a kind of a reference type book.
right. So it's pretty accessible to anyone for the most part. Martha,
Yeah.
you had maybe you even developed a technique for capturing information about the plants. Do you want to speak to your experience finding out what you needed to know for writing?
Jim Fissel was actually the person who came up with how to get the information out of Jim Martinez. For about 6 months, every week, we would get together about once a week, the four of us, over a bottle of Prosecco and a couple of bags of potato chips. And Jim Fissel would come prepared with a list of 5 plants. And he would interview Jim Martinez about the most interesting things about those 5 plants that Jim Martinez could come up with. And we would all ask questions of Jim Martinez too at that time. And we all took notes. And then I would go home and create a rough draft of text from those notes. And then Patty Manning, who is one of the preeminent experts on Chihuahuan Desert plants, reviewed the text for accuracy, and Jim Martinez and also reviewed the draft. And then finally, Jim Martinez and I kind of created the final draft of the text. And we really wanted the book to be about the pictures with just enough text to kind of tweak people's interest, because there's tons of information out there everywhere in other books and online. And we just wanted to provide a few sentences to basically get people interested in the plants to go find out more on their own. And we also were hoping that, with the emphasis being on the photographs and the pictures, people all over the world, not just in dry areas, but anywhere, would start taking a look at their own environment with fresh eyes, and their own plants in whatever area of the world they live in. Give them a fresh perspective, a new way to look at that. And so that's another reason we just wanted to keep the text minimal.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful point to make, that everybody really lives in a specific place. And it might be hard to remember that because there are constructs all around, but everybody lives in a very specific ecosystem. I want to go into talking about a few favorite plants. Does anybody want to volunteer one from the book?
So
Well, go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Jim.
I was just going to make a comment. People ask me this all the time, but that's like asking me, like asking a kid in a candy store, what's your favorite candy? They're all my favorite plants, every one of them. So go ahead, Martha.
Yeah, well, I feel the same way, but one that really strikes me as particularly beautiful, I guess since I'm an artist and I'm always looking at the light on things, I love the Apache plume, because the seed heads just create shimmering light, and especially if there are just big plantings or big areas of the Apache plume plants, they just create the most beautiful light effect. So I don't know, that's just my personal favorite, but I'd be hard pressed to pick just one really, actually, also.
Oh yeah, so Bergen has shared Apache plume on the screen. And this flower, is it, the flower that's on the left, is it through a lot of the year, or as you were mentioning earlier, Mary Lou, like 1 week? Is the flower in the Apache plume?
It's not that, it's usually the little fluffy things are there longer. I'm not sure how long the bloom is there.
That image shows the light shimmering off all the seed heads.
Beautiful.
My favorite plant is the palm leaf thoroughwort, which I used to call the Greg's mist flower, and that is because it attracts so many butterflies in my own yard, and I just love it.
Can one of you describe it a little bit, what it looks like?
It's the one that is purple, and it looks, yes, it's almost like, I don't know.
Oh, great. Thank you, Bergen. Beautiful.
Yeah. It's kind of a bug's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
An interesting point about this plant is just the name palmleaf thorowort, and it's another aspect of our book is that we use USDA designated common names to organize all of the plants in the book. And the what Mary Lou was saying, we all had called this Greg's Mistflower or Blue Mistflower, and it wasn't until we looked it up that the USDA had designated the name to be palmleaf thorowort that we used that in the book. And that became a big driving force. I think Jim Martinez could talk about that a little bit more, about the USDA common names. And but this was definitely one of the plants that had a name that was very different from what we were used to calling the plant.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Jim?
Just that, the reason the USDA decided to do one common name for every one of these native plants in the US was that every plant has, 10 or 15 common names. And the common names, change from town to town, from city to city, from region to region. So to sort of avoid a lot of confusion, they decided that there's going to be one name that they're going to use. And so when you look up these plants, you will always find this common name everywhere, so to make it uniform.
I want to launch into talking about new projects by taking a question we have from Carrie Engelhardt. I think it's a really great question. I think it's a she. Carrie says, the book is incredibly successful in drawing us into native plants with such beautiful detail. You really feel you know the plants. Would you consider a second book that takes us into the coexisting animals and insects that depend on these plants? Might be a great tool for considering the fragility of the entire ecosystem.
Well, I would say that the entire time I was photographing these plants, my table was covered in tiny little insects that were all over them. It would be pretty tricky to capture all the insects that use a plant inside like we did this one. So it's a really good question.
It's a very good question. And I'm sure there are many plants like this, but I can think of, and Jim can correct me, but I can think of bear grass, which has a single butterfly that needs it and it alone in order to, is it to procreate or to eat? Do you remember, Jim?
Where it needs it to cross-pollinate, but it does need it to eat as well. So it's, yeah. And a lot of these plants evolved with just one pollinator or one plant or one insect that, is required to do the pollination. So it's, again, the symbiotic relationship between the two. But many plants like the palmleaf thorowort, if you've never planted this plant, it's like a ground cover. It gets a little tall, but when it is blooming on a given morning or moment, there'll be 1,000 butterflies, and they change day to day. So it's just intriguing to see that. I think possibly it's a great idea to consider doing a book of just the insects or the animals that utilize these plants. So.
Well, and I'd like to make a comment that we are all strong believers in planting native plants. And the thing about native plants is that they feed the native insects and the native birds. If you bring in a non-native plant, they don't even know what it is. So we firmly believe in native plants because we love all our insects and all our bees and flies and want them to be happy.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say a non-native plant is as useless as a plastic flower, but to some insects it might be.
Yeah.
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 It's an interesting book concept that she brings up, and it would be an interesting way to maybe combine photography with illustrations that show the connections between, if you can't photograph the animals, we can maybe do illustration combinations, or vice versa, if you get photographs of the animals and include illustrations of plants. So yeah, it's a great concept.
That's
Yeah.
why he's the brains.
And also the multi-use quality of plants. I think in all hours of the day, somebody different is using the plant. And in addition, in relationship to climate change, I think maybe in the last year and a half, there was a great talk at Sol Ross about how our region's plants will weather or not weather high temperatures. All of that is also interesting. Just flagging it for you all.
Well, and actually, when the weather is bad or something like that, and animals are under stress, even more reason to have native plants, because that's what they need.
Yeah, the durability of the native plants is the ingenious systems they have to deal with high heat was very impressive. Before we go into another question from our audience, I just wanted to see if there were any current projects that you all wanted to highlight, or activities that you wanted to mention.
Well, Jim Martinez and I are currently working with the Chihuahuan Desert Research Institute in Fort Davis, the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center, and they're working on new gardens to surround their cactus collection. They have I think one of the world's largest the largest collection of Chihuahuan Desert cactus, and so Jim Martinez is working on the garden design, and I'm using what I learned in working on our book in helping them design actual booklets that will be available at the gardens. So if you haven't been to the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center, it's a great place to go, because you can actually see probably all the plants in our book in their gardens at the center, plus a lot more. And it's really a beautiful collection. It's a great place to go hiking in Fort Davis. But we're fortunate to be able to work with the staff there and in working on the Cactus Museum collection. It's a new book for the Cactus Museum collection. And then their botanical gardens, they actually have numbered stations, almost 20 numbered stations in their garden. And we're going to be using the format from our glossary from our book to include in their botanical garden guide to provide more information as people go through the gardens to find out detailed information. And it's a fun project. It's a fun group of people to work with at the CDRI, and I think it's kind of a nice extension of our book to be able to use those formats to help people who go through their gardens.
Yeah, Jim, Sharon Curry is asking if there's a specific time of year that's best to visit the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center.
I think I was just going to add to what Jim was saying, that you shouldn't be afraid to go to the garden at all times of the year, because the plants change character from winter to summer. And they have been open during this entire COVID thing. They decided to stay open. They just require that you wear a mask, and you have to make a reservation ahead of time. But even taking a walk just through the garden, which is a really relaxing walk, the plants at all seasons look really pretty wonderful. And then if you need to do more hiking, there's the Canyon Trail, and they have some great geology exhibits, and then other hikes that you go to the top, to the highest point, and then you can see the panorama of the landscape there. So I don't think I can say there's a better time. I don't like going there in the windy season, but
Windy, right?
yeah, but
But that's really any day could possibly be windy. If you just come here for at least 3 days, you're likely to get one day that's not windy.
That's right.
Um,
Mornings
there's
are,
a- Sorry?
mornings are best because there's just less wind in the morning. Yeah.
Yes, like 9,
Yeah.
8, 9. So also, Aaron Baker is asking, inquiring minds want to know, are you willing to do hosted hikes for small groups? Is there a Marfa Garden hosted hike in the works?
If you bring a bottle of Prosecco,
Good answer.
We're easy.
yeah, it's easy. Jim Martinez already gives tours up, has done periodic tours up at the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center.
That's true.
And has done those as part of the Agave Festival that happens usually every June.
That's right.
So
It may be virtual this year, but for sure next year in person, the Agave Festival, which is the first week in June. Did you already say that? Sorry.
and we're always open to showing people through the garden in Marfa. So
Yeah.
Great.
With some notice. Yeah.
So hopefully Aaron Baker heard that. There is another question I want to get to, but just to go back to, for those who are interested in native plants and impacting or reaching out to their local governments, I think what you've done with the city of Marfa is really helpful and interesting. Did you want to take a second to explain it? I know it was actually up on the image a second ago and we didn't take the opportunity to talk about it. It was on the far right where you helped to define native plants for residents in Marfa.
We did, yes, we did do a list for the city to identify sort of native plants and native grasses. The city has a policy or an ordinance that allows you to, it's a permit to keep a native yard, and which means you don't have to mow it down, like a lawn all the time. And so we did a list of the plants, grasses, and other plants that are native to this grassland, and just so that people would have something as a guidance for their gardens.
And did you all invent that, or did you look to other municipalities for a template?
I think we just sort of invented it, I guess, and they already had some plants listed, but we're trying to get some of the plants that listed that were actually invasive species out of the list. And I think there's still one invasive species that's on the list, but yeah.
It was just as important to have the invasive species listed as the native species so that people can tell them apart. And that was kind of the intent, to have both in that list so that you know which plants that are growing in your yard are invasive.
Lynn, did this have something to do with allowing people to have a more native yard, so that the city could see what we might consider a weed? I mean, I hate to use that word, but or if they could identify a yard that was all native and that did not need to be mowed. Was that part of this?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because I think historically this town had either, I guess where I came into it in the early 70s as a very small child, it was either very curtly cut lawn or a very few cactus in a fairly bare yard, but there wasn't an abundance of native grasses that I recall in people's yards. So I think this is working to create an appreciation for the grasses, of which I think when we started, you said there were more than 65. I feel like there are more than 65.
Yeah, I think there are probably 65 that had been identified after the big burn that we had about 77 years ago. something that I like to add is that, I think you always have to be aware in this rural environment, there are a lot of animals that come through your yard if it's a native yard, and you have to be willing to accept that. We have skunks, foxes, some snakes, and just everything that comes through.
Bobcats.
And so it's really important to understand that when you have a native yard, you're going to get all these animals that are going to utilize it, which is a very good thing, and especially for the birds, because in the area that we live in, it's cattle ranching is the major industry, so the grass gets harvested pretty readily by the cattle, and there's not much left for the birds that are migrating to eat, because they're used to rely on that seed out there, but there aren't many seed heads left. So if you have a native yard or natural yard, you'll find that you have an abundance of birds that come to your yard. And it's a little way to add this sort of to make up for the big use of the grasslands by cattlemen or by cattle. I mean, that's the industry here. So it helps out a little bit. But if you like the birds.
Also migratory bats.
And bats, yeah. So you will get a vast array of animals using your yard. So.
I remember Jim Fissel talking about how earlier this year he went out to refill the bird bath because the birds in the area love the grasses in your yard. And a red racer snake was coiled inside the bird bath. So you never quite know what to expect in the way of native creatures.
Everyone uses the bird bath.
Yeah.
Mary Lou, did you want to say something?
No, I'm good.
We have
I was just responding to someone's comment asking if our book could be made smaller to become a field guide, and I thought that was pretty sweet.
Yeah, I thought that was a great question. Do you want to read it?
It says, we have a ranch in Marathon, Marfa, and we'd love to keep these books in our trucks. Is there any way this book could be purchased as a field guide? So Jim Fissel, get cracking on that.
I can shrink it down.
Yeah.
We actually talked about that a lot when we were first working on the book, and we'd actually talked about doing a supplemental field guide that would be something that you could carry with you. We haven't pursued it just because of the effort, but it is something that we could conceivably generate with the information we already have. The booklet that we're creating for the Chihuahuan Desert Nature Center is actually going to be more like a field guide, and we'll have a lot of the information. They're going to be selling those at the CDRI.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And you have another project you want to talk about? Coloring book?
Well, that's just an idea.
Oh, okay.
It's just an idea that we've been working on a project with the Blackwell School here in Marfa, where they're doing a coloring book for 5 to 8-year-olds, and that tells the story of the Blackwell School. And they actually got two high school students. One did all the illustrations, the other wrote the story, and it's turning out to be a really powerful educational tool for very young people to teach about discrimination and racism. And just working on that project with the people at the Blackwell School, it just gave me the idea that would be an interesting new project, is to do a coloring book of native plants of the region that would introduce to very young people through a coloring book. It's amazing how much information you can convey in these illustrations, and it would be a fun, interesting project that I think the four of us could we haven't really discussed it, but it would be a fun project.
Absolutely. I think my experience, particularly recently, is that kids are very interested in the unique shapes and stories, and they want to know, just back to our really great question or idea, I think it was from Carrie, they want to know about that the birds eat these little grass seeds. They want it, the kids are hungry to know how things fit together and how other creatures eat lunch. It's a very popular subject. How do
I
you
really
eat lunch?
I agree with that, and that puts together the two concepts of showing what critters eat what plants, but you could aim it at a younger audience when kids are becoming interested in the environment, and they're our future environmentalists.
Yeah, I think obviously the title of the book should be What's for Lunch.
There you go, yes.
Yay.
Okay.
Just
Love
easy.
it.
Before we wrap up, I want to make sure we hear this good question from Maggie Hauser. We have all been seeing the coverage of Texas's 100-year storm recently in the news. How rapidly is climate change impacting the native plants featured in your book, or is the hardiness of desert plants largely protective against the climate change threat?
They're pretty hardy and resilient, but it is going to change them. I think what will happen is where the species will be located is going to change. You know, as they get warmer, we'll get warmer species up in this grassland. But yeah, it's going to affect the variety that we have, and some may just disappear.
Yeah, and from my experience speaking to people and hydrologists, that it's not just climate change, but it's a combination of the timing of climate change coming when we have, in some parts, most parts of Texas, depleted aquifers.
Mhm.
So it's doubly challenging to have a lack of water when it gets so hot for animals, for the plants. So I do think they have incredible survival capability, particularly the ones that can survive with the less water. But I would say we should be concerned, particularly for the ones that need a certain amount of water, like the this is maybe a whole other talk, but riparian area plants like cottonwoods and willows. But yeah, I think climate change is a pretty big subject, and also just the amount of restoration that is needed in order to responsibly enter or deal with or be ready for climate change.
One of the things that happens when you have diminished water and drought situations is the regeneration of plants, of species, doesn't happen. So you may have an established population that can't reproduce because, you know, the factors aren't there for it to reproduce. So you end up diminishing those plants simply because they can't continue their species. So, but yeah, the restoration is really important to get into. So.
Yeah, and I don't want to imply that that NRCS or Texas Parks and Wildlife and Rio Grande Joint Venture and Borderlands Research Institute and both statewide and regional organizations are not aware or active. I think it's good for us all to be involved so we can do our part, and then also encourage organizations that are working towards that it matters to each of us, because it's so much to do to step up and be really the crutches for the ecosystems that we've depleted, whether by letting certain riparian areas be grazed or whether we've depleted the water. It's only been a short amount of time, about 150 years, but we've got a lot of work we could do to strengthen the lands for the coming extreme weather.
Yes.
We're just going to see if we have, oh, Carrie, who asked the great question about animals and insects says, sorry, another question. Is any organization seed banking to preserve the plants that are threatened with climate change? Saul Ross?
Don't know.
Well, we know that Borderlands Research Institute, and I believe Texas A&M is involved with a grass seed or West Texas seed program.
Yes.
Is that only grasses? Jim, do you know?
I think at this point it is only grasses. And if it's grasses and probably browse species of shrubs like four-winged saltbush and stuff that gets grazed by animals, both cattle and wild antelope and deer. So those are the species they tend to concentrate on. So.
What a wonderful engaged audience we had. Is there anything that you all want to add that we haven't covered?
Well, I would say that I don't know that we covered the fact that we specifically chose plants in our book that you could purchase so that you don't go out and dig them up on your own. So we made sure to choose plants that you can actually buy.
Good point. And is the list of plants that you can purchase, isn't that a changing? Is that changing?
Oh, I bet it is. I bet Jim Martinez would know, but it was one of something that was important to us.
Can you tell us, Jim, if you guys ever have a website or a place to get updates on when plants become available, or what plants you see becoming available that before weren't available in the nurseries?
Well, when I started doing the native plantings, it was about 1990, there were maybe one or two nurseries that were growing them, and they were growing very, very few things that were easy to grow. They still hadn't quite figured out how to reproduce these desert plants. So they either water them too much or not water them enough, or the seed source was not good, or the cuttings weren't good. So it took them about 10 years to really come into production for some of these plants. And then for me, I always say that, if you ask for the plants, they will grow them. But I think they just need to have more people ask. I ask a lot of things that, I know they're not producing, but if I figure that if they hear it from me or they hear it from other people that they want to plant these plants or they want to grow these plants, they will start and they will at least listen to you, and so everyone wants to grow really showy plants that are easy to reproduce, but there's a few growers out there that have been collecting in the Southwest for quite some time, and they've collected enough seed that they're really producing a lot of the material, so and that was sort of again the thing with the book is that we want to make sure that people can buy these materials. You may not be able to go to every retail nursery, but there is a mail order nursery, or you can buy the seeds from a seed source, but they're all available in some form. So.
Yeah, this book really is coming out at a time when, or I guess it's been coming out for a little bit, but it's coming out at a time when I think awareness is increasing, seed availability. It seems to be no mistake that different areas of our culture and society line up to launch very important things together. So I think this book is in good company. There's a question here actually about, do you all work with Borderlands Research Institute for any of your books? And I don't know what you all want to say about BRI, but they are, besides Dixon Water Foundation and Rio Grande Joint Venture, we don't have a lot of truly independent regional biologists and scientists, and they are extremely appreciated by all of us because they are doing on the ground local work, and they've really spent time building a trust and sharing their knowledge and creating numerous studies on everything from mountain lions to quail to pronghorn and pronghorn's relationship with the wintering grassland birds. So I'm not sure if you actually worked with them in relationship to the book, but we are so few people out here that each organization is huge part of our lives and our community.
Yes, we didn't work with them for this book, but I think they do, like you said, just incredible work and important work out here. Yeah, so certainly, if ever we could do that, I would gladly do it. You know, we'd appreciate
We would love to work with them if we were given the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a good time to make a shout out to Dr. Louis Harbison's book, Woody Plants. I think that's the name of it, right? That's a good handbook.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, we're going to wrap up here, but I just want to let you know that you all have a message from Marfa Art Supply. Aaron Baker is very interested in partnering with you on the coloring book concept.
Okay.
Great.
All right.
Great.
Love
Maybe check out the chat before you guys leave, because there's some great messages. And oh, I'm sorry. I think we're running out of time to answer a question about, maybe one of you can look at this great question about can any of these plants be planted in Saudi Arabia? I think I think it's important to pay attention to what's native in Saudi Arabia. And there may be a few overlapping types of plants like date palm that are south of here. That are also in Saudi Arabia.
I think something that's important also is that plants are also very cultural. I mean, they have cultural meaning to a lot of these, to us all. And so, you know, your statement saying that there are a lot of plants in Saudi Arabia that you can use there. And you have to be very, very careful with what plants you use and introduce into cultures in that. But I think if you look into your, you know, in your own world, in your own ecosystem, you'll find things there. But yeah, they can be grown in containers and that in Saudi Arabia, I'm sure.
Mary Lou?
Yeah, I would just say stay with your natives, because your critters are waiting for them.
Yeah, feed the world, right?
Yeah.
I want to thank you all and the wonderful attendees who joined us. This has been extremely meaningful. It's very close to my heart, this subject and the plants and the land and all the flying, walking, crawling, slithering critters. And if you'll just bear with me, I just want to say that the Maverick Book Club is a monthly series from Trinity University Press discussing books that are shaping the narrative landscape of Texas. Next month will be a discussion of the book Fault Lines, Portraits of East Austin with John Langmore, moderated by Michael King. Fault Lines features more than 100 color and black and white photographs of Austin, Texas, taken between 2006 and 2010, during which time Langmore was fully aware that the window for capturing the East Austin community was rapidly closing. It will be on Wednesday, April 7th at 7 p.m. Central. Register now and receive a promo code for 20% off at tupress.org. All right, guys. Do you want to say goodbye in your own special way?
Thank you, Rainer.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. And cheers to Prosecco.
Thank you, Rainer.
Cheers. Cheers.
Thank
Good night, all.
All right.
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.